Welcome back to React Native Radio Podcast. Brought to you by Photoshop, who reminds you, we have AI also. Don't just hate on Stable Diffusion. Episode 259, Tamagui with Nate Wienert.
I am not totally sure that I got all of my equipment set up right. So I could be speaking through a different microphone right now. It could be that it is recording on some other software instead of Audacity. I have no idea if, like, my whole desk got rearranged over the break. And I don't even remember how to start this podcast. In fact, this is the second time we've tried to start this podcast because the first time was a disaster.
Did the elves come in and rearrange your office, or what happened there?
Something like that. Yeah. Well, one elf, one very large elf, me.
Large.
I think my wife would prefer if some other elves would help, including myself, clean up the mess. See, the problem is, like, when I rearrange my office, then a different room gets messier.
Well, yeah.
So
there's no other way to do it.
The mess is just transferred.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But my office feels great now. It's
Same.
awesome as long as I keep the door closed.
I also cleaned my office over the break, but the mess is just like somewhere else in my house now.
That's just how it works.
Yep.
I did do a bunch of, you can kind of see it if you're looking at Zoom, which
Yes. Jamin's
Only
background is
3 others.
very fancy now. I like that new artwork behind you. Who's that hockey player in that picture?
with the Holmgren on the
With
back.
the Holmgren on the back. I
jersey.
don't know who that could be.
Very famous rec league goalie, ice hockey goalie.
Okay,
And
Robin,
then,
bringing up sports references. I'll take
shoot,
it.
you're
Yeah.
right.
Yeah,
You're
wait.
right.
Well, it's hard not to. I've got another sports thing behind me as well. Let's not get into that. But yeah, so it's been a while. Welcome back, Robin and Mazen. I guess I should see if I can remember how to do the introductions. I'm Jamin Holmgren, your host and friendly CTO of Infinite Red. I live in the beautiful Pacific Northwest with my wife and 4 kids. I play hockey, as you can see over my shoulder if you're in this Zoom right now. And that's enough about me. I'm joined today by my unique co-hosts, Robin and Mazen, as well as our guest, Nate, who I will be introducing in a second here. Robin is a senior software engineer at Infinite Red. She's located near Portland, Oregon with her husband and 2 kids, and has specialized in React Native for the past 5 years. Mazen Chami lives in Durham, North Carolina with his wife and baby boy. He's a former pro soccer player and coach and is a senior React Native engineer also here at Infinite Red. Also with us is Nathan Wienert. He is our guest today, and he is a software developer living in Hawaii with his wife. Nate works full-time at Vercel on the Preview Comments project, and on the side, he builds Tamagui. Did I say that right? Tamagui?
That's something we can try and figure out, but I've been calling it Tamagui.
Tamagui.
But see, I have a
Tamagui
question
works.
specifically about the name of it, so we'll talk about it.
That works. Awesome. Well, welcome, Nate. Really appreciate having you on. We saw Tamagui last, I don't know, it was a few weeks ago, and got in touch with you, and we're like, hey, we got to have you on.
Yeah, thank you.
Recently, you released 1.0, so that's great timing.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm excited to talk about React and Tamagui and everything else.
Yeah, awesome. Before we get into that, this episode is sponsored by Chain React. Chain React is the biggest React Native conference in the US. It's going to be happening again in Portland, Oregon. It is, we usually get 400, 500 developers there, all talking about React Native. It's a great time. You should definitely check it out. chainreactconf.com. All right, let's get into our topic for today. Tamagui. So I want to start off here, Nate. Tell us a little bit more about yourself, and then feel free to pivot that into how Tamagui came about as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think you guys covered like the high level. I'm in Hawaii. I have a wife. We actually just moved here earlier this year. Actually, maybe I guess that works as like a sort of segue, which is that before I was here, we were in the Bay Area. I had actually moved out there maybe 6 or 7 years before. to start a startup, which was a DevTools startup. It was with like a co-founder, and we were sort of, it's funny. It's like you kind of chase your tail on the same problems for long periods of time, and you don't catch it for a long time. I feel like, in a sense, I've been thinking of Tamagui as like me finally, or, trying to catch my tail, or maybe hopefully catching my tail finally, because that startup was called Flint originally. And there's like a demo video that's kind of cool on YouTube that we put together that we worked very hard on. And it was maybe a bit like Svelte. Like, it was a compiler. It added a new keyword to JavaScript, which was the kind of our thing. It added a view keyword to JavaScript, which worked kind of like it was for components, basically. So you could do let x equals 0 inside of there, and then it would automatically wrap it reactively so that you don't have to do set state and all that stuff. And so that was kind of the idea. It was, a few years before Svelte ever came out. I think it was a good idea. We just, we were first time founder, or like, we were early founders. We had done projects before, but we ended up kind of like pivoting and doing other things. And it was this whole journey. But I think in the back of my mind, I was always kind of just looking at the same problems, which was like, I want to make apps, I want to make them more easily, and like, I want to make them naturally and share the code and all this stuff. And so, kind of like was working on that out there. And then when that finally kind of ran out of money and everything kind of folded, just kind of looked around. I was like, I need a job. I need something that's kind of like nice that I can, enjoy and like just work at somewhere cool. So Vercel was kind of an obvious choice. And then Vercel's remote first, as I think you guys were saying you guys are too, which is cool. Then that let me just say, like, I've been in the Bay Area now for 7 or 8 years, and there's nothing technically tying me here anymore. So decided to come out to Hawaii.
Why not?
Yeah.
Sounds like the dream.
And I love seeing how the sun is rising behind you. When we started, it was dark behind you, and now it's slowly getting brighter.
Meanwhile,
Yes.
it's like actually afternoon where Ma's in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm ready to take my afternoon nap.
Yeah, it is interesting with work. Like some of my like one of my coworkers is in Atlanta. So, I have to like always kind of front load all my talking and everything.
Yeah.
All my,
Yeah, it is interesting to have people spread across a bunch of different time zones. We're almost all of us are U.S. time zones, so there's a little bit of a spread, but not too bad. But what's funny is like every East Coaster that we've hired has been an early bird. It's
You
like
have to be.
they're all like, oh yeah, I'm going to get up at 7 a.m. my time, which is
Well,
4
then they
a.m.
get
our
all
time.
of their heads down work done for like
That's true,
the
actually.
first 5
That's
hours
probably
of their
on purpose.
day, and then they have meetings with us.
It is fun.
It's so true. But yeah, I am forced to be an early riser because of my kids going to school, but otherwise I would probably sleep in later and later every day. So Tamagui, just give me kind of an overview of what it's all about.
It sort of started as I was working. I've been working on like a project. I was working on kind of maybe you could call it just like a new Yelp or something like that, like a better way to find local eats that are very good. And so it kind of was born out of that. It's just kind of like my dream system for building an app. Like, I just think that, it should exist. It was something that's like, I looked around. I think at the time there was only Dripsy, which I know you guys had Fernando on in a previous episode. He's been actually really great. I mean, I really am a big fan of Fernando. I think he's just like one of those rare people that just kind of like produces stuff constantly, which is really cool. But yeah, I think Dripsy was around, and I was like, it's cool, but like, once you start doing certain things, your whole app slows down. And I had used React Native Web before, so I kind of was familiar with the problem space, and I had done optimizing compilers before, and I knew that could be a way to solve some of these performance issues that I think you run into when you share more than just like the very leaf level, let's say, views in your app. So yeah, I think it's like it's just born out of a desire to be able to like build apps that, as a solo, I think maybe that's the key thing, is like as a small team or as a solo developer, as like you don't want to rebuild every feature X times for however many platforms you're supporting. I think that's the main goal, is like, I want to be able to write an app, just kind of like, you should be able to share a lot more views. Like, I totally understand that, it's good to use platform kind of high level things like navigation and high level views. So I don't think Tamagui is trying to say like, you should use it for every view. I still definitely believe in the React Native kind of philosophy of like you should target the platform, but there's also no reason that like a profile view or like a settings pane that has inputs and stuff like that shouldn't be able to be shared. And I think what the problem that you run into when you're just doing React, when you're sharing with like React Native Web, is that you're writing responsive stuff in a way that's not SSR compatible, and it's also not using CSS media queries in a lot of the libraries. And same thing for like hover and other like interactive styles or pseudo styles, I guess you would call them. You end up doing like, you know, state driven or JavaScript driven events that then change the state on native. And so it was just like, I want to fix some of those problems where things start getting very heavy on the web and you're not using CSS. And I mean, I've just been working on UI kits in some form or another, or like, you know, front end in some form or another for a long time. So it's kind of been an ongoing project maybe for many years.
What is Tamagui built on?
Originally it was just actually it's kind of funny. It's built on a lot of stuff. I actually owe a lot of credits. Like it's really a hodgepodge of projects. I think actually the original project was JSX style. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, or I mean, the audience, most people probably aren't, but it was built by, I forget his name. I have his like GitHub avatar in my head right now, but I can't remember his name exactly, but we should add that in or something. But they built like a compiler. It was originally, that was just like a optimizing compiler, so to speak, or it did most of the extraction to CSS for an older style library. And I was just like, I want React Native support. So it was kind of like take React Native Web originally, add JSX styles compiler, and then just sort of work from there. And then over the time, I've actually pulled out React Native Web because I originally was patching React Native Web, which was kind of a hacky thing. So I actually had like you had to run like a build time step that would actually patch React Native Web so that it accepted class names, because before it just wouldn't, until version 18, they just wouldn't accept class names. And that was the only way I could get a lot of the features working. So it wasn't until pretty far into the betas that like I was able to get rid of that kind of like whole thing. And that actually was thanks to the fact that they added class name support in version 18. But so it's a hodgepodge of projects because it's using, you know, I've copy and pasted a decent amount of code from Radix just to get like the component API that I think they have that's very nice for like some of the higher level stuff. And I've thrown in like, you know, floating UI, which is like a really great library for all the different floating things. So I'm trying to not do as much as possible. But I think one of the in the vein of that, before I ramble on too long, which is just that the core library was built on React Native Web, and it used it for all the style stuff. And I've actually, mostly because of the fact that I couldn't do class name, but now it's kind of nice in a different way because the core style library for Tamagui actually doesn't have really any dependency. It uses this one tiny dependency for colors, but other than that, it has no dependencies, which is pretty nice because it means that if you aren't using, like if you're just doing, say, like a marketing page or something on the web that doesn't necessarily need all of React Native, you can actually use Tamagui as like a web-only style library, and you don't have to bring along React Native Web at all.
That's
right. Which, so like the way React Native Web is like React Native first with like web added in. This is maybe sort of the opposite. You've approached it to be like mostly web inspired.
Yeah, it's a good way of putting it. It's like, it's kind of web first, and then you can like add native. Maybe that's a way of looking at it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I do need to get in this one really, really important question, which is the name inspired or at all related to Tamagotchi? Because that is absolutely the first thing I thought
We
of.
need to know that. Yeah.
Yeah. The good news is that yes.
Okay.
I think so. I
Mystery
think the
solved.
journey. Yeah. I think the journey was originally called Snack UI because it had stacks, and it was very uncreative. And I was like, stacks. I like snack, and then I think I called it Snack UI. And then I think the Expo guys reached out and they were like, hey, we kind of use Snack for like a few things. And I was like, actually, that's fair.
A few things.
I didn't really think about that you guys use Snack. So I was like, what do I call it? And then I don't know how I don't know exactly how I got there, but I think I was thinking of like other foods. And then I was thinking of like, oh, well, Tamago's like egg. And then and then Tamagotchi, and then GUI was there. Right. So
It's just natural progression.
yeah,
I love
That's
it.
a great name. It really is.
it's better than Snack UI. That's for sure.
Well, Tamagotchis are coming back in. I've noticed like they were
I saw
gone for
an
a long
ad.
time, but you
Yeah.
can get them again. Anyway, that was a really important thing on my mind. I wanted to get that out of the way. Can you talk a little bit about like who else is building this with you? Like who's on the team? Do you have a funding source? Is there a company that's sort of sponsoring it? Like who's behind Tamagui other than yourself?
Yeah, good question. Actually, it's sort of like luck that it exists. Because like in a sense, like I mentioned, I had this startup before and it was kind of winding down, that we had pivoted a few times. We had done a bunch of stuff. And I think I just had like a little bit of funds left. And so I was working on this project, and I think it was like luck that I had just a little bit of funding left over, that I was able to just kind of like work on whatever. So it was a passion project. It was born out of that other project that I've just been hacking on. It's kind of like the Genesis project of Tamagui, of Tamagui, yeah, which is like this food search app. But yeah, so like I was running out of money there, and I was like, okay, I need to start applying for a job, and I'm not going to finish this app anytime soon. the app that I'm working on, I was like, that's obviously still like at least a year or two away from being ready. But the UI kit that I've been working on with it is honestly like, if I did work really hard, maybe I could get it out while I'm interviewing for jobs. So that was like October last year, or like maybe September, October last year. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to like drop everything on this app. I'm going to try and just release this project because it's worth it. I think Silex, there was like a lot of rumors even that at that time, a year plus ago, that like Silex was coming out. And I was like, oh man, it's going to happen again. Because I built this thing called Reapp a long time ago. And it was like maybe like Ionic, or like I think it's called Capacitor now or something. Like it was like mimicking iOS and Android on the web, but like making it very close. And so I built that app a long time ago. I went to the first React conference ever, as like I was all excited to show it to people. I'm like super stoked because I've been working on it a bunch to get it ready for the conference. And it's like the first day of the conference, and I'm sitting down, I'm watching like this thing, and then they announce React Native, and I was like, cool. You know, like it was like cool, but shit.
Taking your thunder there. Wow.
Yeah. So it was kind of a thing where I like a lesson that I should have learned, because I was like, okay, so lesson is maybe don't do things that like Facebook could be doing. And yeah, it was like a whole thing. But then I was like, you know, Silex was getting kind of, they were like, I think there were some tweets about it. It's going to come out soon, and it's a compiler. And I was like, oh man, I've got this compiler thing. Like it's going to happen again. But whatever, like I was like, I haven't learned the lesson. Like just release it. Like at least I'll be able to release at the same time. Like it seemed like they weren't doing native stuff. So I was like, well, maybe I'll just have the native thing. So I kind of, that was the motivation to release it. And no, it's just me. So far, it's just been me. I'm working on this. I mean, Vercel's very kind to like, kind of like give me some bandwidth to like focus on it. And we'll see, like there's some chances for them to start using it more internally. I don't think there's anything official at all, but you know, I'm hopeful that will kind of keep progressing. But yeah, you know, there's definitely a lot on my mind right now with 1.0. Like, how do I make it sustainable, and how do I keep doing that? But I actually, you know, like I'm not looking to rush into like a VC type thing. I actually kind of have really enjoyed being able to like keep it small and just do what I want day to day. And so I'm very hopeful that maybe I can find a path to like do it my way, I guess, so to speak, like not go, you know, rocket ship it or anything like that.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Before we get too much further, because I want to deep dive more into Tamagui and you know the features that are available and things like that. But there were a few alternatives out there, you know, already when you started working on it, or at least when you know got to the point where you were really fleshing it out. And you know, I don't know, Dripsy and some others that were out there. So what about those things didn't really solve your problem that you're trying to solve, or maybe their approach wasn't aligned with what you wanted to do?
Well, keep in mind that, like, you know, I think everyone's irrational, and probably if I was sort of trying to be like, oh, I'm going to get my app out, you know, like if I was being really rational about this startup, like I probably wouldn't have built Tamagui. You know what I mean? Like, I do think that if you're just trying to ship something, like, it's a lot of the times that you can get away with bad performance. And I think Dripsy and even, you know, all the other UI kits are pretty fine. Like they will work especially for an MVP. So I will say that, like, you know, some of it is just me. I've been gnawing on this sort of bone for so long. And like, I do know that for like an app that's really getting a little bit more depth and it's getting a lot more elements on the screen, I definitely have felt the pain where like it's just annoying to have to spend a lot of time on performance when you don't want to be doing that for your app. And I was spending for this app, you know, it's again like imagine like a Yelp type screen where you have a search results page. That is actually pretty performance sensitive because you have a lot of items in the list, in each list item, so to speak, that you're showing. You want to show a lot. You want to show the star ratings, a summary of like comments. You want to show a bunch of images. You want to show like a bunch of little meta details and all that stuff. And so you end up with say 25 or even 30 different like subcomponents in each list item. And then you want to show ideally as many list item as possible, you know, and you want to have that scroll pretty fast when you swipe down and you have like an infinite list, and then you end up with virtualization. And it's just anyone who's been there, I guess, building an app screen that has like more than say 30 or 40 elements that need to be on the screen at a time knows that like you start paying a lot for render time, especially. And then on the web, you know, you resize your browser and everything. If you're not using media queries and if you are re-rendering in React, you're going to have just a terrible experience for like how fast the site can resize. So those are two things that I'd say like I ran into. But yeah, I mean, I think that it's not something that you need to do, but it is nice that like if you chose Tamagui, you could probably avoid quite a bit more of the time that you have to spend in that area of like worrying about, oh, do I have a budget for kind of how many elements I'm rendering?
It's really incredible. I was looking at the, like on the website, you use the phrase automatically fast. And there's a little comparison between like Tamagui and React Native Web and Dripsy and Native Base, which is quite a lot slower. And it sounds like you've touched on it a bit already, but I mean, what's going on under the hood? What are the primary things going on under the hood that make it so much more performant than the alternatives? And like you've talked a little bit, but like what's the magic?
Yeah, it's a compile time thing, right? It's not a runtime necessarily.
Yeah.
Also, by the way, shout out, you know, Native Base. They've been awesome. They've been very like supportive, and I always kind of like
They're great people over there. We really
they are. Oh yeah, we have
really cool.
We've had a long standing relationship with Native Base. We like them over there.
Okay, cool. Yeah, no, I always feel like, you know, you want to, I mean, they've been around. They have a much more feature complete UI kit. They've got like they got really great accessibility from what I hear. So, I mean, shout out to Native Base. They've been very cool, even though I've definitely been pressing on the performance side.
We had Sunkit on the show a while
back. We need
back.
to have him again.
Yeah, a while back.
Yeah, he seems like a really nice guy. I haven't met, but it's been cool actually to like, you know, you come out and you compete, but I think it's maybe like in a lot of sports where like you have respect, like a lot of respect for the people that are just doing like cool stuff. So I have a lot of respect for everyone that's doing that. And they do have a lot of stuff in there. Like it's a very feature complete UI kit that can get you pretty far, especially for like a lot of types of apps, I think. But anyways, to get to what it does, I think so like, so part of it is just extracting CSS. I think, you know, you pull out CSS at build time. And you're going to do a lot of good for your app because there's less JavaScript to parse and there's less, you know, you don't have to do stylesheet.insert, which can cause repaints and reflows and you know, because it's happening as you're doing your first render, it can very much trip up the like browser paint and layout engines. So part of it is pulling out CSS, and that's great for, you know, a few reasons, not having to do JS, not having to do these layouts and stuff on the first render. But the cooler thing that I think that Tamagui does that's kind of novel and was kind of added, I think it was added by me after JSX style. I kind of like eventually got to this point where I realized that you could flatten things, which I know there's a lot of lip service to flattening. And I need to write maybe and show it more clearly of what I mean by that. But the idea is that you make these styled components, right? So you use the styled factory function just to make like a styled component and give it some properties and all this stuff, right? And so you end up and that's a nice thing to have. You want to like build up this like kind of like system of default components that maybe have like different properties that they accept and they're used all throughout your UI kit or your app. But the thing is, like, for example, on the website homepage, there's like this little example where it shows like a fake kind of Safari for the responsive, I think, section. It's maybe the third or fourth section. And it shows like a little fake browser window that's like, you know, I think it's 500 pixels squared or something like that. And that browser window, for example, has That's actually the most optimized thing on the homepage, which I think it has 49 styled components that are actually turned and flattened into just a div. So what happens is like if you're not spreading, so you have to kind of know the rules, and like I definitely will put together a document on this at some point that's kind of like how to not de-optimize Tamagui, which is like there's a couple rules basically. One is spreading. So like if you spread like ... props down onto a styled component, that will de-opt because it doesn't know, what's coming in. And the other thing is like just any dynamic. So like if you say like, import a complicated function and then run that function and then use that to like say do a style or something like that. Like, so if you do like a very complicated sort of
calculating with or something.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Some complicated thing. Maybe you take a prop and then you like add something to it. So it just can't do anything there. So as long as you avoid those sort of things and you just kind of using your styled components or the stack and text that come with Tamagui, what it'll do is it'll say like, okay, I can analyze all the properties on this stack that you've used in this view. It's like you've set it like width and you've set background color and everything that you've done is understandable to the compiler. It'll actually just swap out a div there instead of a stack. And then it'll just put the class name directly on there and it'll extract the CSS. And that's pretty huge. Like it's if you look at like, especially for React Native actually. So on the web, maybe it's a little bit less. Like I've looked at like Stitches, for example, was an inspiration as well in some cases. And Stitches does like, it's pretty fast actually, even when it has to run the component because it just doesn't use that many hooks internally. It doesn't use that many, it doesn't like process the styles that much. It kind of is smart about all of that. So yeah, like, so running that extra step, it does cost, but it's not a huge cost. But then once you add in React Native and the full React Native API set, which is quite a lot more. It's got the press events. It's got like all these things. They require hooks. I think like the typical view in React Native uses like, I don't know, but it uses more than like, let's say 5 hooks or something like that per component, plus looping over all the props a few times and doing a bunch of like transformations, creating a bunch of objects. So just in that little Safari, like fake Safari thing, you have 50 less components that have to like run all of that logic on mount, which is just really, I mean, it's hard to get around that really does make a big difference. So I would say that's the big win that didn't come until later. I didn't even realize that was like kind of a cool thing until later. But I think atomic styling and the CSS stuff, kind of once that fell into place, it's like, oh, well, yeah, I mean, I guess that's the only thing that's output, at the end of the day. So there's no need to have an extra component in the tree.
You could do that manually, but it would be a lot harder. You'd have to really be thinking, and you'd have to have a lot of discipline and consistency. And so by having the compiler do it, you can kind of build things how you would normally build them with a few rules, like you said, and then have the compiler optimize it under the hood. Yeah,
that's the whole thing is that like, I think you could do, and then again, the thing is, how would you do that universally? Because you could do that for the web.
Exactly.
Yeah,
you'd have to have separate components that are imported and you'd have to write it twice or more. So yeah, no, this sounds way better. Are there any trade-offs there? Like when you're doing that, do you find, are there some situations where the compiler gets it wrong, for example?
That's a good question. I mean, there are trade-offs. I would say the trade-offs are, one is a little bit of complexity. Obviously, you have to like set up a build time thing. 2 is a little bit of build time cost, which you have to like pay for. It uses Babel currently, which it would be nice to maybe in the future do that with something fancy, but it works. And it also doesn't have to scan most of your file. Like it can sort of do heuristics to be like, well, this file doesn't even import anything from Tamagui. So, it don't have to like check that file. So, but yeah, so I would say a little bit of complexity cost of setup, a little bit of cost of build time, although that's motivated me to make everything work without the compiler. So that's what motivated that. I was getting a lot of questions early on, like, oh, a lot of people struggling to set it up, or a lot of people just saying like, do I have to set it up and stuff like that. So I ultimately went with this model that costs a little bit more in bundle size because you have to ship all of Tamagui every time. And maybe in the future, there's a way to get around that. But so I actually recommend not turning on the compiler in dev mode because, just wait till see if you like Tamagui, see if like, try it. Don't even set up the compiler. If it seems to work for you, then it's kind of like a bonus. It still runs pretty fast, actually. I think even in comparisons, I think it's still near the top without the compiler. And then the compiler just kind of like does that extra magic. And then, yeah, you touched on correctness. there's always a chance. And I would bet that there's probably still some like edge case correctness bugs like here and there. That's been a huge focus getting to 1.0 was like stomping out a bunch of those like things, and also just trying to simplify kind of like the structure of it to get it to be like, so that it's harder for it to be incorrect. So it's close. I think the website, has like tons and tons of pages, tons of demos, and it's 100% across all of those, which is pretty good. But the nice thing is you can disable it per file. So you can put a disable like a pragma at the top of your file if you want to disable it for the file. It's a nice way to also sanity check if you're just like developing with it and you're like, is this caused by Tamagui or is this just like something I'm doing? So you can disable it. So I think there's like there's fallbacks, disabling per file or disabling it altogether. And there is some risk, like, it's a cost for me to maintain. So there's some risk there too.
The next thing I want to talk about is animations in general. So first thing, correct me if I'm wrong here. It seems like you are giving the developer the option to choose between React Native animation, animated versus reanimated. Is that correct?
Yeah, there's also a CSS for the web plugin.
For the web. Yeah, correct. Cool. I really like that idea of like the plugin aspect where, you do at Tamagui / reanimated animations - animated package. It's almost like a plugin. You kind of need to opt into it. Can you kind of go into like why you went in with that kind of like plugin perspective? And then is there a performance hit in that? Because now we're bringing in more what sounds like dependencies on board. And then which one do you recommend? Because I know reanimated works on web and React Native too. Sorry, so many animation questions, but I feel like I want to kind of go through all of them.
It's one of the biggest like headaches when you're trying to share code between platforms.
Exactly. Sharing the platform code, and then not just, once we, mainly from our React Native side, we're always trying to make sure it's optimized, it's not jittery and stuff like that. So there's a lot of like things to keep in mind with this.
Yeah, actually, in a way, it's kind of cool to be interviewed by people who are just like, building React Native stuff every day. Because in a sense, I think you guys have more experience than I do. I've built React Native apps, but I'm not, it hasn't been like a continuous thing for me. So I'll actually maybe have some interesting like follow-ons for you guys. But yeah, I mean, the animation stuff is, it's one of those things where I was looking at it, and I was like, I'm not going to do this for 1.0 because it's a whole beast. And like, I don't think that, I don't think animations are necessary, but I don't know. I kept thinking about it. I was looking at Moti. I think Fernando released like, Moti and playing with reanimated and stuff like that. And it's one of those things where it was like, how am I going to do the compiler with animations? Is it going to work? And it's one of those things where like, I think there's this like mantra of, what's the mantra where it's like, get it working, get it right, make it fast, or something like that. Like make it work, make it right, make it fast, or something like that. But I do think there's something that's like, the make it right. It's very like, Tamagui makes it fast, right? But it was like the animations to me was like this scary cliff. Like in past UI kits that I've built, I've actually ran into a thing where I was like, oh shit, like that feature that I implemented before, it's really not like it doesn't work now with like atomic CSS. I think that's what I ran into, this whole problem where I had to refactor the whole style engine, and then it just fell apart because it was like, oh shit, like all these features that I put together, they don't really work together. And animations to me was like that dragon where it was like, how is it going to work with like compiling and with like cross-platform? It just seemed like it seemed worth kind of like poking into at least. And then, and so I just poked into it, and I think like where it's at is it's nice, but it's also, I would say the animations part is kind of like, it's still very much a work in progress. There's so much cool stuff that could be done, but I don't know, like, okay, so reanimated it's very cool. And I also think it seems to be moving much faster. And I think I'd prefer to use that if possible. But it also has been harder to build due to like, the setup. And I think it's got like this, it's as a library, especially, it's been kind of hard because I had problems with the bundlers kind of picking up the directives that you have to use and stuff like that when it was in a third-party library and all this stuff. So right now I would say the React Native animations one is definitely much better tested because that's the one that I've been using for like all my testing. I think the reanimated one needs some love. But the pluggability is, I mean, yeah, it was just something that was like, it would be really nice to just use CSS on the web. That's such a, because Reanimated is pretty big, and so is React Native Animated. React Native Animated is also very big. That was kind of, I think that was the driving force behind that, and getting API to kind of work, you know.
Yeah, no, that all makes sense. It is a beast, a dragon, like you said, and you got it working, which is big first step. I think now just kind of iterating on it, improving on it. And I mean, Reanimated too, and I feel like they're just plugging out this. Self-Dimension is doing this like really fast. I think with the new architecture, there's a new version bump that's going to happen soon. So there's a lot going on there to kind of keep up with. The demo works great, I think. So this is pretty cool.
We're getting low on time, which is unfortunate because I could ask you questions for a long time. But the last sort of technical question I wanted to dive into just a little bit is the question of accessibility, which has been a topic that React Native Web has sort of famously struggled with because of the use of just like div soup instead of semantic UI and what impact that has for screen readers and other accessibility tools. How is Tamagui handling accessibility and making sure that that problem is solved or at least addressed?
Yeah, I think it's something that's an area that Tamagui's needs to get better at. Just in general, I haven't really done much beyond support the accessibility props that React Native supports. It does support tags though, so you can set the final tag name, and the compiler does that too when it does the flattening, which is pretty nice. So when it flattens a view, it will keep it as whatever tag that you specify. So I do use that on the website and in other places too. So I guess in that sense, I hadn't really thought about that as accessibility rather than just like semantic correctness or whatever. But yeah, that makes sense. It's accessible as well. But it is something that I've gotten feedback on, which is that the components, at least in the UI kit, could use some love in terms of that. And that's something that I definitely want to focus on in the future. But yeah, I mean, you can use all the accessibility props, and you can set a tag. So you can set it to span or section or article or whatever.
That's actually quite useful. Good. I'm glad it's being talked about, which is not true of all libraries like this. It can tend to be an afterthought or just like deprioritized altogether.
Yeah, very much so.
I feel like we as a React Native community and the broader React community as well have been sort of searching for this holy grail of like, sharing code between web and mobile. I'm loving seeing libraries and efforts by talented programmers like you coming out options like this. So kind of give me the elevator pitch of when would I consider using Tamagui for my app? Like what would be a situation where I'm going into, creating a new app? What does that look like when it's like Tamagui would work really well for this? Is it every app or is it like more focused than that?
I want to say that like, I do think I think if you're considering React Native, if you're considering the React ecosystem, I want to say that I think it, because like, again, I designed it for myself and for like someone who wants to share more code and ship a little bit quicker, right? So I do think that like if you're a small team, it's amazing. But I also think that, I don't know what else you would use, I guess, even as a bigger team, like to get better. Like, I think it's also got all these really advanced kind of things that it does that don't exist yet. So, I would like to selfishly say that if you're doing React Native, I think it's worth at least looking at. Yeah, I think that it's got the starter. So, maybe the other thing that you could say is that it's got a little bit of complexity, like in terms of design. You have to set up a design system. You have to set up some stuff. So even in that sense, maybe if you're just really prototyping stuff out, don't use it. I would say maybe in the very small case of just prototyping and just playing around with stuff, there is some complexity cost, but there is also the starter kit that I think gets you set up with a pretty nice setup. So if you're okay with Next and Expo, it's kind of pre-set up, and it's, you can eject Expo or whatever, but like, I think as long as you're okay starting from that, then the starter will get you very far. If you're just like, you don't want to set up a bunch of stuff, you don't need a design system, then Tamagui may not be for you. But smaller, large teams, I think it's worth considering.
We'll link to the starter kit and, of course, Tamagui's website, which is, I think, just tamagui.dev. It is, yeah, tamagui.dev. And the announcement, I've got a few other links in there, JSX Style, Dripsy. I've got a link to your GitHub sponsorship, which helps support your open source efforts, Stitches, some other things like that. So check out the show notes if you are listening and interested. We hope you are, because this looks really cool. Nice job on this, Nate. Congrats on getting 1.0 out the door. That's pretty exciting.
Thank you, guys. And thank you so much for having me on. This has been very chill, and I really enjoyed talking to you guys.
Yeah, I wish we had more time. Like, this would be a great, like,
the vibe we
deep
go
dive.
for.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, maybe we could do something a little later and come back and see what you've been up to. Really appreciate having you on. It's been fantastic. Where can people find you online if they're, interested in asking you questions or just following along with your progress?
Yeah, I think my Twitter, Nate Birdman, is kind of like the main source. And then if you're getting into Tamagui, highly recommend joining the Discord. It's very active, lots of people there. So Twitter or Discord.
Perfect. You can find Robin at Robin_Heinz. You can find Mazen at Mazen Chami, and you can find me at Jamin Holmgren. You can find React Native Radio at React Native RDIO on Twitter. And as always, thanks to our producer and editor, Todd Worth, our assistant editor and episode release coordinator, Jed Bartowski, our designer, Justin Husky, and our guest coordinator, Derek Greenberg. Thanks to our sponsor, Chain React. Go check it out, chainreactconf.com. We'll work on Nate to see if we can get him there at some point. That'd be fun. Thanks to our other sponsor also, Infinite Red. Check us out at infinite.red/React Native. And make sure you subscribe. Send this episode over to people, someone who you think might be interested in, cross-platform UI frameworks and optimizations, performance, all that stuff. I think this is a good one to listen to for that. So, Robin, do you have a mom joke to send us out in style?
I do. Shamelessly stolen from our company Slack, Frank Calise. If you're listening, you get credit for this one. I got a sweater for Christmas, and it was picking up static electricity, so I returned it to the store. Do you know what they did?
What?
They gave me another one free of charge.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Robin. All right. Well, we'll see you all next time.